Hey, it's Phil Ratcliffe, and thanks for joining in today. Today we've got a great show for you. We've got Pete Riddell here and Maggie from Riddell, Aimar, and Brehm. They specialize in tax law, and I think it's something that's on a lot of people's minds right now. Well, maybe not since they just got their returns or whatever the case, but it should be because there's a lot of changes. So thank you guys for coming in today.
Thank you, Phil. I'm Pete Riddell. I'm attorney here in Gahanna. This is my assistant, Maggie Wagner. And Phil was kind enough to invite us over today and speak on tax and probate issues. And hopefully we can give you an informative session as to what we think are important issues and some common mistakes people make, and hopefully some direction as to what to do for the future years in light of the new tax code.
Awesome. Well, you know, I think with everyone we have in, I think one of the most interesting things beyond the subject is like personal story. So how did you get into law, and then what gravitated you towards taxes and tax law?
Interesting story. When I was out of college and still in the military, I of course was looking forward, what can I do when I get out? And I had written some letters to various schools about postgraduate work, and I got a reply letter from Ohio Northern that said that they would accept me into the law school as soon as I could become available. So I decided to become a lawyer at that time. I left the military and went into law school at Ohio Northern here in Ohio, and I took the LSAT, did well. That's the law school aptitude test, and they took me in, so I had a place to go to afterwards.
Awesome.
The military in its wisdom felt that $283 a month was all I would need to finish my school. But fortunately, with money saved and the assistance, I made it through school.
Awesome. Well, thanks for your service. I know you were telling me you served at the tail end of Vietnam,
Correct.
and you weren't drafted. So, I mean, even double kudos to you for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At the time, it was a difficult situation to be in the military. The public were not as respectful of soldiers then as they are now. But it's very nice the country's matured, and they separate unpopular issues from the actual soldiers. So the country has matured greatly.
Absolutely. Well, there's a lot of your generation because
Correct.
they were on both sides of it and
Yes.
saw it and finally reconciled. So
It's very good. Very
yeah,
good.
absolutely. So what do you find is the biggest mistake that individuals and businesses make with their taxes, you know, when they come to you or what so?
Fortunately, our client base is pretty sophisticated. Most of them are successful people who are very competent in their chosen field. The most common mistake we find is they forget to bring documents. The other is we'll have clients totally forget to bring in their 1099 brokerage statements. And every year we get several correction letters from IRS saying you owe us many thousands because the cost basis on a stock was not reported to IRS, and the client, well, I lost money, so they didn't bring in the forms. It's a simple procedure to catch up, but it certainly scares them when they get this enormous bill. Typically, once the proper information is submitted, then the issue goes away.
And tax law, the IRS, it's not like criminal law. You're not innocent until proven guilty. You're guilty until you can prove that you don't owe them, right?
That is correct. They tell you what you owe, and you have to prove that they're wrong.
Yeah.
Which is not what we're used to.
It's a lot nicer for them, right?
Absolutely. And of course, the penalty is if you fail to respond within the time period, then it becomes an assessment. And then once it's assessed, the only way to relieve the issue is to go to the tax court. And they send you a 90-day letter, and you have 90 days to respond to that and file a complaint, a petition actually, in the tax court. And unless you do that, the assessment becomes solid. They don't change it.
Wow.
So it's a very harsh penalty if you don't follow up and follow the procedures and go the numbers.
So they may be wrong, but you got to be on the ball.
Correct. You
Yeah.
have to follow up. Number one thing is make sure you pay attention to those letters. Don't listen to phone calls that say you owe us $5,000 and send it in the form of Visa vouchers or something.
You know, that's funny because, you know, I've always found that the IRS is pretty efficient personally, and even, you know, the Ohio Department of Jobs and Family Services or Workers' Comp or whatever. But I don't even understand how these people, like, don't pay their taxes for 10 years and they owe the IRS all this. Like, how's the IRS not getting this money from them? You know, like...
Yeah, it's a difficult issue. It's very easy. Once you skip the first year, there's a fear element, and then you say, well, I'll file it again next year. Then next year, typically, if you owe, you'll say, well, I'll put it off. They didn't say anything. And we've had cases. One gentleman in particular, he just died recently, as a matter of fact. He owed for 10 years. And he was caught up in one of these tax protest movements, and he felt that he didn't owe taxes because it was a deprivation of his civil rights, and the Constitution said that there should be no per capita income tax, which is exactly right, and it said all payments to the government had to be in the form of specie, gold and silver. So the greenbacks were not specie, and he believed that. And of course, the person who was pushing him was a tax protester, I think, in Arizona. And of course, when he was down in front of old Judge Canary, the long dead now federal judge down here, standing in front of him charged with tax fraud, the protest leader wasn't there next to him.
Oh, sure, yeah. Nowhere
So,
to be found.
in this case, we felt very lucky to keep him out of jail. But
Yeah.
we got all his taxes filed, and he eventually paid up, and everything was fine. But the tax protest movements are unfortunately, they divert people's attention, and they prey on their anger and frustration having to
Sure.
pay taxes, and it's not a good thing. You need to pay your taxes. You may not like it, but you have to, because the penalties are just
Absolutely. It's
so
for your
severe.
betterment,
Correct.
even if you don't agree with it.
Yes.
Right?
It's
And there are
very simple.
avenues to protest legally and advocate to change the laws, right?
That's correct.
Even though it may be hard.
Well, and that's and that's the thing. The amendments to the Constitution, the original Constitution did not provide for income tax. It did not provide for the Federal Reserve notes, which we have now.
Sure.
But you'll ask a person who strongly believes that and say, well, do you believe that you should keep your gun? Well, of course, the Second Amendment says that I can keep my gun. And you believe the police can't come into your house without a warrant? Oh, absolutely. The Fourth Amendment says that. Reasonable search procedures. Well, I said one of the amendments allows them to do a per capita income tax. And another amendment sets up the Federal Reserve system where they can give you a greenback. Well.
You can't pick and choose, right?
You can't pick and choose, that's correct. You can't pick and choose.
And we're a big society. I mean, we have to make rules for everyone, not just one little subsection, and hopefully we keep evolving over time to make things better, right?
At least the goal is to make things uniform and that the rules are uniformly applied. And unfortunately, in individual cases, things become abusive.
Sure.
And no matter what, one of the most famous cases of abuse, I think, is it was in the Supreme Court. It was Korematsu versus United States, and that was a case that originated out of the Japanese internment in World War II.
In the Southwest.
Yes, and they were literally removed from their homes forcefully and sent to detention camps in Arizona, Nevada, and places. And of course, they lost their homes, they lost their jobs, they lost their savings, their assets. But the Supreme Court, being very practical, didn't decide the case until after the war was over. And then they said you shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
So they're a practical group as well as a legal group. So many decisions have a political basis for them, and it's interesting that there's sometimes years delay before the case is presented and it's decided.
And that's the difference between a CPA and a tax attorney too, is
Correct.
I don't think a lot of regular people realize that all of our tax rules aren't necessarily rules that the government just wrote, but was decided in a case, and there's precedents, and
Correct.
you can actually create new precedents by winning or losing the case, right?
You have to be specially admitted into the tax court. Myself and my partner Alan Aimar are admitted into the tax court, and we're allowed to file petitions and tax issues. Typically, a petition is filed when we get a 90-day letter contesting an assessment. We've presented probably a couple dozen cases in the tax court. It's very rare to get that far. It usually has to be a very expensive item,
Or it's just not practically
or
worth
issue.
it.
Correct.
Yeah.
Or it's just simply not worth it. You know, paying the attorney $10,000 to go to the tax court, it better be a problem less than $10,000.
Yes, sure.
So the small issues.
If you're rational, not like the guy that's just
correct.
fighting the cause, right?
Yes. Unless
Yeah.
you're basically consumed with that passion.
Yeah.
One of the other issues is that is the new tax laws that have come up Our experience has been that it is exactly as advertised. The average person who is not what I would call a high-end taxpayer, in excess of 200,000 or more, but someone, let's say, between 50 and 200,000, the average tax bill that we have projected is usually between $500 and $2,000 less than 2017. So for the average middle-class person, it's exactly as advertised. Now, 1,500 or 2,000 is not necessarily a huge sum, but it's certainly a step in the right direction. Those who are over 200,000, we have found that generally their bill goes up.
Yes, sure.
Anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000.
A lot of the local and state taxes, which used to be a huge deduction for them, aren't going to matter as much.
Yes, the SALT taxes, state and local taxes, and the property taxes, those are now capped at $10,000. An interesting issue is New Jersey and New York specifically have now passed legislation where instead of paying your property taxes to the specific county, you could pay it to a charitable organization, which will then will in turn pay the taxes for you in return for a small service fee. So it's a situation where they're trying to convert it. Yes, they're trying to morph it into a charitable deduction, and I'm reasonably confident that'll get squashed pretty quickly.
That's what I heard. I heard there were like more states that are ready to do it, but they're waiting to see if the IRS is going to squash it.
I think it will be squashed because the state doesn't have that authority to morph suddenly a tax into a charitable donation. I think, and it's a very short-sighted solution to a problem. I can understand what they're trying to do. They're trying to keep the high-end taxpayers in the state.
Especially in high-tax states like New York and California and what's so.
Absolutely. Like Donald Trump being a New York resident, he would pay, if his net taxable income is $600 million, he would pay 12% of that to New York. And also another 5 or 6% to New York City. California would be the same way. It's enormous tax burdens.
Probably going to move out to Florida or Nevada or something like that, right?
Texas, yes. A lot of people are going to move, I think, to states that do not have an income tax. If you're a high-end taxpayer, it's a significant savings. If you make $1 million a year, that's for Ohio, that would be $70,000, $80,000, and you would save that living in Florida.
Absolutely. So, you know, maybe give us a couple red flags for an individual or a business where they say, I've been doing this myself, or I've been using some software, or I've been using a low-end tax preparer. There's a red flag that you say you need to talk to a CPA or a tax attorney.
Generally, when the business gets to the point where it's no longer just breaking even or an exaggerated hobby, shall we say, then you need professional assistance. We have found, and we always encourage our clients that have some type of a small business to use QuickBooks, Professional. And one of the nice features it has, it will query you on what is your type of business, a trade, a construction, a carpenter, a real estate agent, that type of thing. And then it will suggest the various categories of income and expenses that you should use. And you can set up a book of accounting very quickly and then code in your checks and your payments. They have features where you can tie it into one of the little cubes attached to your phone.
I like the square.
It's the square,
to charge or with the PayPal.
It's not a cube, it's a square.
Well, I just think that's the brand name.
Oh, okay. But it's right, it's a little square. I've seen it that plugs in. And it will automatically provide this for you. Then at the end of the year, when you go to your tax preparer, either us or someone else, it will print out a nice profit and loss statement for you so that you have a good idea of what you brought in, what you spent, and what you spent it on. And then, of course, you would have capital expenditures, and spending $10,000 on a new computer is not an expense; it's a capital expenditure, which has to be depreciated. And that is typically, I would say, for most small businesses, one of the major mistakes is they don't account for capital expenditures being written off over a period of time. Although
so they're accelerating it when they're not really supposed to be allowed to do that.
Although a lot of the tax code now, to encourage investment, there's a very, very large upfront deduction, typically 50%
Awesome.
of
Yeah.
the capital expenditure in the first year.
But not 100.
Not 100, correct, not 100. The other issue that many people don't really do well is keeping track of your expenses. The number one would be mileage expense or automobile expense for your business vehicle.
Absolutely.
They now have those computer programs on your phone which will track mileage for you. And then we always encourage clients who use a car or two in business, like a salesman or a real estate agent, that they should have an independent examination of the car at least twice a year. Go get your oil changed. And the oil change receipt is important for IRS, not because it proves you changed your oil, but because it's an independent statement of your mileage.
Oh, okay.
So
yeah.
you did, in fact, drive that many miles on this vehicle.
Sure.
So if you have one in July and one in December, well, yeah, we drove this many miles.
Perfect.
Here it is.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's a nice backup to that. But of the last couple audits we've been, it's almost like they dusted off the books from the 1960s when everything was done in pencil and paper and everything was a receipt. It's interesting that they pulled out all these old textbooks for the agents to review, and it's not, quite frankly, in my opinion, up to speed with the new computer age.
Sure.
They're still using 60s and 70s audit methods. They want a receipt for everything, a handwritten receipt. They don't, if you have everything on, let's say, one of those Visa cards that does a spreadsheet which says this is what you spent on entertainment and everything, they want to see the checks, the canceled checks, verifying you paid the Visa card. Which seems somewhat medieval.
I thought for some reason, I thought that, I don't know, this is what I keep my receipts, but I don't organize them or anything. But I thought they said that if you had a statement from the bank or the credit card company, plus you keep it in some third-party accounting software, then that would be good enough to not have to have the original receipts. But
now maybe it was just my clients, but in this instance,
you would know better.
Twice. Well, twice the agents actually wanted to go so far as they wanted to see the canceled checks to ensure that you paid on the Visa card every month. And didn't just let it run up.
Oh, so that you weren't taking deductions for debt that you were just holding.
Correct. But
Okay.
IRS takes the position that since most of us are a cash basis taxpayer, when you pay it on the credit card, it's paid.
Okay.
Even though it might take 5 years to pay that debt off, it's paid
Yeah.
under their own guidelines. But that's a major area where people fall down is the record keeping requirements. And especially people who are self-employed, they're very busy, and they don't realize we're under the same record-keeping requirements as General Motors, which is a small army of people keeping track of this stuff. And that's where the average person will fall down.
Yeah. So they need to get some bookkeeping, basically.
Correct. You need some basic bookkeeping skills. And the other thing is that most small businesses will fail for essentially two reasons. One is lack of management expertise. The person may have been an excellent plumber, they may have been an excellent carpenter, they may have been an excellent real estate salesperson, but they're not a broker, an owner, they're not a contractor. And it takes there's a learning curve to get yourself up to speed on how to manage other people and how to manage jobs and keep things flowing. It's not just one thing at a time. And the other is lack of sufficient capital. A lot of people start out with a terrible lack of capital. And you will ask them, well, if you set up an LLC for, let's say, a carpenter who's going to start a small construction company, well, how much do you have in reserve? Well, I got about 50,000. That should last me a while. I said, well, will that provide for your expenses for a minimum of 6 months to a year without you bringing in a dime? Oh no, it's not going to be much. I'll spend 50,000 in a couple months. Well, that's not sufficient.
It's like the business equivalent to living paycheck to paycheck, right?
Absolutely, absolutely, exactly. And then another mistake that you see frequently is, well, I'm not going to take a salary. I'm going to put my money back into the business. I think philosophically that's a mistake. You're in business to make money. And if your own personal needs for your house and your expenses for your wife and children are not accounted for in the business practice, then you're better off working at McDonald's for minimum wage. Absolutely are.
Well,
We don't run into that too often, but we set up a lot of small LLCs.
Yeah.
And that's a common area that you run into.
I think there's an old book called E-Myth Mastery, and that's exactly what they talk about, is people that are practitioners that are really good at what they do want to be their own boss.
Right.
But they're not necessarily good at running a business. And a lot of times the amount of work that they put in is not consummate with what they get out of it, and they would have been better off being an employee.
Spending 90 hours a week and ending up
Having a
with
higher
$200 or
quality life.
$300.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's not correct. And unfortunately, when you're small and starting out, if you hire a manager to run the business, or someone who has management expertise, so that you can go out in the field and
Balance it.
supervise,
Yeah.
then a lot of your profit is moved
Sucked
out.
away.
Yeah, sucked
Yeah.
away. Yeah. So it's a very difficult thing. So I think the number one issue when you start a small business is make sure you have sufficient capital.
Absolutely.
So that you can survive for 6 months to a year with minimal returns. And if you can survive that first year, I think then you're going to be fine.
That's great. I see one thing that I don't like a lot happening more and more is people doing robs, using their retirement and putting in new company stock to take the money out of it without
Yes.
tax. And you know, I think personally I think it's kind of dangerous, just because it's self-dealing, obviously. And why is the company worth that? No independent valuator would make it worth that. But anyways, obviously they're getting capital, but
Right.
it's not probably the way that they should have. It's like, if you can't get an SBA loan, to me that's kind of a verification. If you can't get a commercial loan or an SBA loan, you don't have like a business plan. It may not be the best viable option, even though you have money. You know?
I would concur with you 100%. It's called a retirement plan for a reason. And it's supposed to be there
Safety
for when
net.
you retire.
Yeah.
It's your safety net. You go clear back to Roosevelt when he set up Social Security. It was supposed to be a three-legged stool. Your retirement plan, which back in those days was a traditional pension plan funded by your employer, and then you had your own savings, and then you had Social Security. It was a part of a three-legged stool. And a lot of people, unfortunately, as you say, they're taking one of those stools, which is your personal assets and savings, and using them for current needs, which will rob you down the road.
Yes.
And the term is exactly right. You're robbing yourself. You're committing theft, but it's against yourself.
Yeah.
And you're going to be in difficult straits down the road. It's a way to fund things, but it's extremely high risk. And,
I agree.
When it hits, and you do well, you might be 1 out of 500 that do well. The others, they're in trouble.
Yeah.
Their life
And it's a
savings
double
are
whammy.
gone.
You know, you didn't make it, and you got to start over on the retirement too.
Absolutely.
So,
It's not a smart way to go, in my opinion. But the other alternative, as you mentioned, is a small business loan. And an SBA loan has so many restrictions.
Oh, sure.
They want to be able to be guaranteed to get their money. So
they want a loan on property.
correct. They want a security on all of your assets. They usually want additional collateral in the form of a loan on your personal home. They want monthly, sometimes weekly reports on your cash flow and your expenses. And the security agreements are so extensive. I mean, I'm surprised they let you, flush toilet paper. They have a lien on that. But they also investigate everything very thoroughly. A lot of people are resentful that they go in and ask for all of this information.
Everything all the time. Yeah.
And you're always under their scrutiny. And when they feel their security is imperiled, which could be just 2 bad quarters in a row, then they have the right to go in and, using a cognovit note, which is a confession of judgment, they can get a judgment against you immediately.
Wow.
And they'll have an attorney
Just wipe
who
you out.
writes
Yeah.
up the complaint. The guy sitting in the next room will sign it and confess judgment on behalf of the client, you, and they'll get a judgment right then. So they can sit there and basically have a sword over your neck very quickly.
Well, Pete, Maggie, thank you guys so much for coming in. You obviously know your stuff. I mean, people got a lot of information real fast.
Thank you.
We've been putting your information up, so go check out Pete's website. Call him if you have any tax needs or need some help. And thank you guys again. We really appreciate you being here.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So join us next week. We're going to have Michelle Hoffman in, talk about remediation if you have water damage or what's. So it's going to be a great one. Tony's going to do it. I'll actually be out of town at the Ohio Valley Plastic Surgery Conference, so we'll go see some of our clients down there. So you guys have a super weekend. It looks like it's going to be beautiful, and we'll see you next week.